Okay, in beginning our series on plating non-conductors, we decided that we would start out with this shark's tooth. I think it's a fossilized shark's tooth from some way period long ago. What I've done is trying to decide how I would hang it to mount the bezel. I tried a hole smaller, but the shark's tooth kind of hung like this rather than straight up and down, and so I ended up moving it up a little bit. And I fabricated this little bezel out of copper wire, and I drilled a little bit smaller hole up here, and so, whoops. So what we'll do is we'll put the copper wire into the hole, push it in. It's a pretty tight fit, and I tried it on a piece of chain, and I think it'll work fairly well for how it hangs. As far as the other hole I drilled in the wrong spot, I'll just fill that with epoxy, and it'll cover up, and you'll never know after the thing has been plated. Okay, I've mixed up a little 5-minute epoxy, and actually this is 5-minute Gorilla Glue epoxy. And you know, there may be better epoxies, I don't know, but we're just gonna use it to fill in this little hole I made. And then we're gonna use it to also glue in our bezel. And what I'll have to do is, after the epoxy is set up, I'll go through and clean up any of the epoxy that might have got up on the bezel, because I do want the bezel to plate everywhere. But we're going to be treating this, coating this shark's tooth with a conductive lacquer anyway. And then we'll be plating the entire thing. And so that's good enough. The epoxy has dried, and you can see that I'm now clipped to the wire bezel that I put in there. In hindsight, if I had it to do again, I would have put the epoxy in the hole and then pushed the bezel in. But I've also filled the little hole there for the first hole I tried drilling. Now the product that I'm going to put on my initial coat with is it's a silver coated conductive copper. And it's an extremely conductive surface, but I've never used it before, so I don't know just how it's going to flow on the part. You know, we want to get it even as much as possible. Of course, we've got to be able to get it everywhere. After I've coated it with this superconductive material, I'll probably go ahead and spray a conductive nickel on it. Or I may not. It kind of depends on how it looks once it's dried. What I eventually plan on doing with this particular pendant is I'll go ahead and plate the entire thing in copper, and then nickel, and then probably gold. And then I'll mask off the upper part and rhodium plate, which is a bright, shiny white metal, about like, well, it's the same stuff they put on wedding rings. The lower part of the tooth, and give kind of a two-tone effect. So the upper part up in here, the part that was in the jawbone, will be gold, and the bottom part that was the tooth will be silver. but it's a very beautiful white silver. It's not much more so than nickel, and it'll never corrode. Well, I think that's about it for coat 1. We'll let it cure a little bit and put one more coat on it. Okay, we've completed painting the surface with the conductive lacquer, and we've touched it up, and I believe we've got everywhere completely coated with a conductive lacquer. So therefore now, on something that was a total non-conductor, now we have a piece that has a totally conductive surface that should be able to be copper plated. And we'll plate this with copper and then nickel and then gold. So the next stop is the copper tank. Okay, here we're down with our ProLab, and we're going to plate this tooth that we've coated with the silver coated copper conductive lacquer. And I've clipped to our little copper bail that I put in there so that I've got really good contact when I go into the copper. Okay, we turned the air on, the ProLab, for the copper and the nickel for our agitation. And I'm going to leave my common connected to it so that I make sure that I've got really good contact. This is so light that the contact between the copper wire and the bus might not be that great. I'll just use that hook that I've formed in here to hold the part up. So we're plating with our bright acid copper, and we're plating at 1 volt. And we'll put it in, and we'll probably have to leave this for 8 or 10 minutes. I can see right now we're at 1.4 amperes of current. And so that's a good current density. That's an indication that our copper is conducting well. And I'll pull it out after about a minute, and we'll make sure that it's the copper is going on to the conductive paint. Okay, it's been 1 minute. We're going to take a look at it and just make sure that the copper is going over the entire surface. And rinse off just a little bit here. Oh yeah, it looks like we're getting very good copper coverage. So the purpose of the copper plate is to not only give us a nice metal layer on top of the shark's tooth, but also it'll brighten up. And you'll notice that as we plate, it'll get noticeably very bright. And that gives us a very good base for our bright nickel, which will be next. So now I'm going to go in for, and we'll set the timer for 5 minutes. So we'll go in for 5 more minutes. Okay, so it's been the 5 minutes, so we're going to take another look at it now. So yes, we got a good conductive layer of copper on there now, and it did brighten up well. Okay, now we're going to be going into our bright nickel plate, and we're going to be doing that at 1.7 volts. And we're going to just go in and start with probably 5 minutes. Okay, we've been in the nickel for 5 minutes. We'll pull it out and see how we did. Yeah, looks real good. So now we'll give it the pre-gold rinse. And then we'll go into the gold tank. We'll adjust our gold voltage to 2.5. And we'll go into our gold. This is a decorative item, but it's probably something that's going to be handled quite a bit. So I'm going to go again. I'm going to go 5 minutes into gold at 2.5 volts. Okay, so we've been in the gold for 5 minutes. Pull it out. Give it a quick rough rinse. And it turns out very nice. Okay, if we've taken it out and we've dried it off and we've got a nice finish on it, and if you wanted it to be shinier or brighter, then you would leave it in the copper longer and or the nickel longer. And that would actually get rid of some of the matte finish from the conductive paint.